The day I became the most hated man in Lakeside Estates was also the day I became its most powerful. $500. That's what Karen Wellington and her precious homeowners association fined me for fishing with my grieving daughter. What they didn't realize was that I had 4 million reasons to fight back, and enough spite to use every single one. If you're watching this on your phone, hiding out in the bathroom to escape a soul-crushing HOA meeting, drop a comment and tell me where you're hiding. I promise this story will keep you glued to your screen. My name is Remy Thorncraft. Until just 2 months ago, I was living what most people would call the American dream. I spent 15 years in venture capital and financial investing, eventually selling my stakes in multiple tech startups for more than enough to retire comfortably at 42. But life has a way of reminding you that money isn't everything. Last year, my wife Rachel lost her battle with cancer, leaving me to raise our 14-year-old daughter, Celine, alone. The grief nearly tore us apart. The only thing that brought us any peace was fishing, the last activity the three of us shared before Rachel's condition took a final turn. So, when I decided it was time for a fresh start, I searched for a home near water. Somewhere calm, somewhere we could heal. Lakeside Estates looked perfect on paper. Upscale homes, great schools, and a beautiful 6-acre lake in the center of the neighborhood. The realtor mentioned the HOA, but assured me it was just basic stuff. Lawn care, exterior paint colors, nothing major. I should have paid more attention when she hesitated before adding, "The HOA president, Karen Wellington, is very dedicated to maintaining property value." I didn't think much of it at the time. I dealt with difficult personalities my entire career. How bad could one community leader be? I found out exactly how bad on a quiet Saturday morning in April. Selene and I had been fishing off the small dock at the lake for about an hour. It was the first time I'd seen her smile. Really smile in weeks. She had just caught her second bluegill and was gently unhooking it when a sharp voice cut through the calm air. "Excuse me, what exactly do you think you're doing?" The woman walking toward us looked to be in her late 50s, dressed in pricey-looking athleisure. Her perfectly highlighted blonde hair was styled in that unmistakable, "let me speak to your manager" cut. She held a tablet in one hand and wore a look like she'd just caught us spray painting City Hall. "Good morning," I said, keeping my voice polite. "Just fishing with my daughter?" I offered my hand. "I'm Remy Thorncraft. We moved into the house on Sycamore Drive about 2 months ago." She ignored my hand completely and tapped on her tablet with purpose. "Mr. Thorncraft, fishing is strictly prohibited in our community lake. You're in direct violation of HOA regulations. I'm Karen Wellington, president of the HOA." She said that last part like she was announcing royalty. "I'll need to issue a violation. The fine is $500. I felt Celine freeze beside me. "There must be a mistake," I replied, staying calm. "The realtor specifically mentioned fishing was allowed here. It was one of the reasons we bought the house." Karen gave a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That regulation was amended last month. All residents were notified by email. Ignorance of the rules doesn't excuse violating them." She turned her tablet toward me, displaying a document titled, "Amendment to Recreational Use of Community Lake." The date showed it had been approved only 4 weeks ago. "We never got any notice," I protested. "I oversee all communications personally," Karen said, as if that proved her point. "The email was sent to every household. Perhaps you should check your spam folder. I can't be responsible for residents who don't read official messages." I clenched my jaw, but kept my voice steady. "May I ask why fishing was suddenly banned? The lake is clearly stocked. I can see bass right there near the edge." Karen glanced at our rods with open disdain. Environmental and safety concerns. Hooks can injure wildlife. And we've had complaints about the smell of fish and bait disturbing residents enjoying lake views from their homes. She looked pointedly at our modest tackle box. Not everyone wants to see this kind of activity while sipping their morning coffee. Something in her tone made me study her more closely. The way she sneered at our gear, this wasn't about rules. "We're being careful," I said. "Selin and I practice catch and release. We always clean up before leaving." Karen's expression turned icy. "Mr. Thorncraft, perhaps you're not familiar with how we do things here. Lakeside Estates uphold certain standards. This isn't some public fishing hole." She glanced at Selin, then back to me. New residents often struggle to adapt, especially those used to different types of neighborhoods. The implication was loud and clear. I felt anger rising, ready to respond, when I heard a small sniffle. Selin's eyes had filled with tears. This was supposed to be our safe space, a place where, for a little while, she could forget her mother was gone. And now, this woman was poisoning it with her condescension. "We'll pack up," I said softly, wrapping an arm around my daughter. "Please email me the fine and the updated regulations." Karen's smile returned, victorious. "Excellent. I'm glad we understand each other. And do be sure to check your email more carefully in the future, Mr. Thorncraft. We wouldn't want any more misunderstandings." She turned and walked away, her designer sneakers barely rustling the perfectly trimmed grass. We packed up our gear in silence. Solon wiped her eyes. "Dad, why was that lady so mean? We weren't hurting anything." I didn't have a good answer, at least not one I could give a 14-year-old. "Some people care more about rules than they do about people, sweetheart," I said softly. "Come on, let's head home and have some lunch." That afternoon, I checked my inbox and spam folder thoroughly. Not a single email about a fishing ban. That's when I decided to dig deeper into the HOA and Karen Wellington in particular. What I found was eye-opening. Karen had served as HOA president for 8 straight years. Her day job? Owner of a boutique real estate firm that specialized in luxury community properties. Exactly like Lakeside Estates. Scrolling through her social media, I found post after post of Karen hosting lakeside parties, at the very lake she'd just fined me for using. These events were anything but quiet. Loud music, catered setups, even alcohol. So much for preserving the peaceful atmosphere. But the biggest revelation was buried in the HOA bylaws. According to the documentation, the lake wasn't actually owned outright by the HOA. It was designated as a common property amenity, shared equally by all residents. There was no mention of exclusive HOA control. That evening, as I looked out the window toward the lake, I spotted Karen again. This time at the gazebo surrounded by a group of well-dressed friends, wine glasses in hand, laughing and carefree. "So, they want to play the rules game?" I muttered under my breath. "Fine, but I'm going to find out who really owns that lake." The next morning, while out front checking the mail, I bumped into an older gentleman walking his dog. He introduced himself as Merrick Henderson, a retired attorney who lived just a few houses down. When I brought up my run-in with Karen, his friendly expression darkened. "Ah, met our neighborhood tyrant, have you?" he said with a sigh. "Let me guess, she hit you with some random violation and a hefty fine?" I nodded. "She's been pulling this nonsense for years," Merrick continued. "Most folks just pay up and keep quiet. But if you're interested, I've got a collection of HOA war stories and plenty of documents. Come by for coffee sometime." I took him up on the offer that very afternoon. His home was lined with law books and framed pictures, likely former clients or colleagues. Over a strong cup of coffee, he started laying it all out. "Here's what most people don't realize," Merrick said, pulling out a thick folder of HOA paperwork. "The lake isn't actually owned by the HOA. It belongs to Meridian Development Corporation, the original developers. The HOA only leases usage rights, and that lease, it expires in less than 2 months." That stopped me cold. What happens when the lease ends? Technically, Meridian could renew it, or they could sell the lake to the HOA or to someone else entirely, Merrick explained. "Most residents assume the HOA owns everything. That's exactly what Karen wants them to think." He leaned in. "But here's where it gets interesting. My contacts say Meridian's having financial trouble. They may be trying to sell off assets quickly, and Karen knows it." Over the next hour, Merrick and I pored over public records, and what we found painted a disturbing picture. Karen's control over the neighborhood went far beyond simple rule enforcement. Through various LLCs tied to her real estate firm, she'd been quietly buying up properties, often after the owners had been driven out by relentless fines and violations. "She's playing a long game," Merrick said, "and now she's aiming bigger. Word is, she's negotiating with Meridian to buy the lake herself, not on behalf of the HOA, but through her own company. Plans are already in place to reduce community access and build high-end homes along the shoreline." Suddenly, the fishing ban made perfect sense. This wasn't about protecting wildlife or maintaining peace. It was about prepping the lake for private development. That night, Merrick introduced me to another key ally, Samuel Washington. Samuel, a retired bank owner in his 60s, was one of the few residents who openly challenged Karen's leadership. A dignified man with a calm presence, he invited us into his study and revealed a meticulously organized database he'd built, tracking the HOA's actions over the past decade. "I started this as a basic record-keeping project," Samuel explained, gesturing to his monitor filled with charts and spreadsheets. "But the patterns became impossible to ignore. His data confirmed our suspicions. Minority homeowners received violation notices nearly 3 times as often as white residents. Newcomers were targeted for infractions. Longtime residents were routinely allowed to ignore. Most damning of all, properties forced to sell under pressure consistently went for less than market value, and many ended up in the hands of entities tied to Karen's firm. Karen's acquisitions often ended up in the hands of shell companies with ties to Wellington properties. Her real estate operation was nothing short of calculated. She never buys directly, Samuel explained, pulling up a series of property records. She uses a web of LLCs, Lakeside Investments, Wellington Holdings, Sierra Vista Properties. They all trace back to her, but the connections are buried deep enough to avoid detection. He showed me documentation for 6 homes purchased over the past 5 years using this method. Each followed a familiar pattern: numerous HOA violations, property values in decline, rushed sales, and then high-end flips after superficial renovations. Merrick nodded, grim. "The lake is her end game. Meridian Development's been struggling since the recession. They over-leveraged on commercial projects and are quietly selling off residential assets to cover debts. The lake was never intended to be a permanent green space. 30 years ago, the original development plans included lakefront condos, but environmental laws had blocked construction. Those regulations have eased," Samuel added, "and with her connections at City Hall, she could absolutely get permits for limited development. 6 luxury homes could bring in 7 or 8 million easily." My professional interest was piqued. "Tell me more about Meridian's finances." As a former venture capitalist, I knew how to spot distressed assets with potential. Over the next few days, Samuel connected me with his old banking contacts. They confirmed Meridian was on shaky ground. The company had borrowed heavily for a commercial project that collapsed when anchor tenants pulled out during the pandemic. Credit lines were maxed. They were unloading assets quickly to avoid bankruptcy. The lake property, valued at around $300,000, was one of the few remaining unencumbered pieces of real estate. Meanwhile, Merrick had been quietly organizing meetings with other discontented residents. We rotated locations: Samuel's house, the local library, even the back room of a friendly baker's shop. The stories we heard painted a disturbing picture. She wrote me up for having too many holiday lights the day after I spoke at the town council, said James Morris, a retired teacher. Same lights I've used for 15 years. Now suddenly they're too bright? Maria Gonzalez, a healthcare worker, shared her own experience. She banned my foster kids from the pool for being too loud. When I asked which rule they broke, she said it was her executive decision as HOA President Diana Winters, a young widow, told us Karen led an inspection team through her backyard. 2 days later, I had violation notices for 5 things. Stuff everyone else had too. When I pointed that out, she told me maybe this community wasn't the right fit for someone in my situation. Each account revealed Karen's strategy: target opponents, apply pressure through HOA rules, and force them to conform or leave. Those who stayed learned to stay quiet. Those who resisted were harassed. From these meetings, we began to build a network. Samuel set up a secure messaging group where residents could safely share info and experiences. We were, in essence, forming an underground resistance. I started digging into Karen's personal financial situation. I knew how to analyze property records and corporate filings. What I found was telling. Despite her polished image, Wellington Properties was drowning in debt. She'd leveraged her assets heavily, probably to maintain her lifestyle and finance more acquisitions. If the lake development failed, she would be in serious financial jeopardy. She's not just after profit, I told Samuel and Merrick. This is survival. She's overextended. If the lake plan collapses, so does she. That changed everything. We weren't just facing a bully. We were up against someone fighting for her financial life. That made her dangerous, but also exposed. At Samuel's suggestion, I reached out to Robert Chen, a real estate broker with inside knowledge about the lake and local market. We met at a cafe 20 minutes from the neighborhood to avoid attention. Karen's been trying to scrape together financing to buy the lake for $300,000. Robert confirmed, speaking low. Meridian's in freefall. They gave her a 60-day exclusive negotiation period, but they're desperate. If someone else comes in with cash, they'd probably take it. He also dropped another bombshell. Her empire? Mostly smoke and mirrors. Wellington Properties looks big, but she's leveraged to the teeth. She's using her HOA ties to keep up appearances, but she's 3 bad months away from collapse. That lake is her last shot. With this, I began planning. As a venture capitalist, I specialized in spotting distressed yet valuable assets, exactly what the lake represented. I had the capital to make a fast, all-cash offer, something Meridian couldn't ignore. The key was timing. We wait until she's fully committed, Samuel advised. Let her announce the special assessment. Let her sell it to the community, then we strike. Merrick agreed. The more she invests, time, money, reputation, the harder she'll fall. And when the community sees it, they'll know she used them. We kept everything secret. To outsiders, even Karen's loyalists, we looked like a bunch of upset residents documenting HOA abuses. But Karen knew something was happening. She'd ramped up random citations against people tied to our meetings. Still, she didn't know the full plan. Armed with our information, we prepared for the next step. Robert arranged a quiet meeting with Tom Branson, the Meridian exec handling the lake's sale. I knew this would be a turning point. The meeting was held in a private office downtown, far from prying eyes. As expected, Meridian was desperate. "I'll be straight," Tom said after introductions. "We gave Wellington a 60-day exclusive window, but there's a clause. If someone offers fast cash, we can take it. She's still trying to line up investors, but we needed the money yesterday." "What's her offer?" I asked. $300,000 spread over 18 months with a complicated financing plan, Tom said, clearly frustrated. "Our CFO wants to offload non-core assets now to support our downtown project." I nodded. Then I made my move. "I'll offer $350,000, all cash, closing in 7 days. Tom blinked, caught off guard. That would definitely get the board's attention. But Karen has friends in city government. She won't let this go easily. "I'm counting on that," I said with a smile. 2 days later, I had a preliminary agreement in hand, pending only a routine environmental assessment. To maintain secrecy, the buyer on the paperwork was listed as Thornycroft Holdings, LLC. I had established a company solely for this transaction. Unless Karen had personally investigated the corporate registration, she wouldn't have been able to trace it back to me. As I quietly built my coalition and explored my options, it seems Karen caught wind of my actions. Suddenly, I began receiving violation notices for issues that had never previously been mentioned. Things like improper weed control, unauthorized landscaping materials, mailbox height discrepancies, and even a citation claiming my garage door was the wrong shade of taupe, despite it matching the approved color when I moved in. The fines started to stack up, 100 here, 200 there, and within just 2 weeks I was staring at nearly $2,000 in violations. When I attempted to contest them, my appeals were either mysteriously lost or denied without explanation. It became clear that Karen was weaponizing every available HOA regulation to force me into submission. Then things took a darker turn. One afternoon, Sen had left her bicycle in the driveway while she dashed inside to answer the phone. Within 15 minutes, a violation notice appeared on our door, complete with photographs. Someone had clearly been watching the house, waiting for the smallest infraction. The harassment wasn't random anymore, it was calculated. And it wasn't just me. Anyone even remotely associated with our group was suddenly under scrutiny. Maria Gonzalez got cited for her lawn being a 1/4 inch too tall, measured by Karen herself. James Morris was fined for a bird feeder that had been in his yard for over 10 years, but now supposedly violated a rarely enforced aesthetic guideline. Diana Winters received a notice for improper trash disposal because her recycling bin was 6 inches too close to her garage. It was a campaign of intimidation, but it backfired. Rather than break our momentum, Karen's overreach fueled it. With every absurd violation, more neighbors joined our cause. By the 3rd week, we had representatives from nearly 30 households, over a 1/4 of the community. But then came the moment that shook me. My daughter came home from school in tears. But then came the moment that shook me. My daughter came home from school in tears. "They're saying we're troublemakers," she cried. Brianna told everyone that her mom said we're trying to ruin the neighborhood. It turned out Brianna's mother was one of Karen's closest allies on the HOA board. The conflict had escalated. It wasn't just about me anymore. It had reached my child. That night, after Sen had gone to bed, I called Merrick. "I'm thinking about selling the house," I confessed. "This is starting to take a toll on Sen." "That's exactly what Karen wants," Merrick replied. "She's done this before. At least 6 families that I know of. She bombards them with violations until they're forced to sell, usually below market value, and then her real estate contacts buy them up. He was right. Walking away would mean letting Karen win. And worse, showing my daughter that the way to deal with bullies is to run. Later that evening, I received word. The environmental assessment on the lake had come back clean, and Meridian's board had accepted my offer. The paperwork was ready to sign. While reviewing the HOA documents again, I discovered something that changed everything. Karen's proposed special assessment for lake improvements, which was clearly her way to fund the purchase, required 75% homeowner approval, not the simple majority she had claimed. She was trying to bypass the HOA's own rules, confident no one would dig deep enough to call her out. That was the moment it all clicked. "They've dragged my daughter into this," I muttered as I closed my laptop. Time to show them what happens when you push someone trained to deconstruct and rebuild entire systems. The next morning, I withdrew $350,000 from my investment accounts, about 15% more than Karen's offer. I called Samuel Washington. Not only did he support the plan, he offered to lend me an additional $50,000 to strengthen our leverage. Within 48 hours, I had signed the paperwork. The lake, all 6 acres of it, along with the 10-foot shoreline perimeter, was now mine, not the HOA's, and certainly not Karen Wellington's. The timing couldn't have been more satisfying. The day after I closed the deal, Karen had scheduled a special HOA meeting to unveil her vision for the lake. She had even hired an architectural firm to create renderings of her proposed improvements. I'd seen a preview on the community bulletin board. It included reducing the size of the lake by 20% to make space for a members-only lakeside lounge. Conveniently, this plan would have eliminated the most popular fishing areas. I told no one except Merrick and Samuel. Meanwhile, Karen's tactics grew even more aggressive. She called an emergency HOA meeting to push through a special assessment under the guise of urgent community needs. At the next HOA meeting, Karen stood confidently at the podium, launching into a PowerPoint presentation titled "Elevating Lakeside Estates, a Premier Vision." She outlined a strategic reimagining of the lake area, insisting it would enhance both property values and the community's prestige. What she neglected to mention, of course, was that her own real estate company would be managing the development and sales of the new lakefront properties she intended to build. As part of her effort, she announced a new fee, an additional $50 per month from each household, allegedly for critical community improvements and lake maintenance. In truth, it was just a way to fund her personal ambitions. Then, with a thin veneer of subtlety, Karen launched a smear campaign, targeting me without using my name. She warned the community about certain new elements who didn't understand their values and hinted at financially unstable individuals trying to harm property values. It was a calculated jab. Samuel stood up to defend me, only to be publicly humiliated by Karen. With false sweetness, she referenced a past tax issue he had already resolved. "I just find it interesting," she said, her tone laced with poison, "that Mr. Washington feels qualified to lecture us on community standards when he once had to settle unpaid taxes with the IRS. Perhaps we should clean our own houses before judging others." It was a cheap shot. Samuel's audit had been the result of a clerical mistake, long since cleared, but Karen twisted it to make him sound like a tax cheat. The meeting spiraled further when Sapphira Duskaland cautiously suggested that perhaps a full community vote should be held before making such drastic changes to lake policies. Karen's response was cold and cutting. "Sapphira," she said sharply, "isn't your flower shop's lease up for renewal soon?" It would be such a shame if there were complications. The threat was paper thin, and everyone saw it. Sapphira quickly backed down. Watching this performance of coercion and intimidation, I felt a strange peace settle over me. Karen had no idea her dream project was already doomed. The lake she spoke of with such pride no longer belonged to Meridian, and it never would belong to her. Behind the scenes, Karen had been leveraging her connections with Mayor James Wilson to increase pressure on me. Suddenly, my house was flagged for random safety inspections. Questions surfaced about old renovations completed by the previous homeowner. The mayor himself kept a distance, but his building inspector, conveniently related to Karen by marriage, was suddenly deeply concerned with the stability of my deck. The pressure campaign was working. When Sen came home crying for the third time in 2 weeks, ostracized by classmates repeating lies about our family, I nearly broke. But then came the call I'd been waiting for. Meridian's lawyer informed me that Karen had just been notified. The lake had been sold. The buyer's identity was undisclosed, and all negotiations with her had been terminated. Later that day, Karen showed up at my doorstep. Her usual composure was gone. "What did you do?" she snapped, skipping all pleasantries. "I know you've been speaking with Meridian. Did you sabotage my deal?" I greeted her with a calm smile. "I'm not sure what you're talking about, Karen." I did hear the lake was sold, though. Hopefully, the HOA gets along well with the new owner. Her eyes narrowed. This isn't over. The HOA has a binding recreational use agreement. That lake can't be taken from us. "You might want to review that agreement," I replied coolly. "From what I understand, it expires in less than 30 days, and renewal is at the sole discretion of the property owner." Her face paled, but she masked it quickly. "The community won't stand for this. We'll sue for access. Good luck with that," I said with a smile as I shut the door. The following 24 hours were fascinating. Karen scrambled, calling a closed-door emergency HOA board meeting. Through our growing network, we learned she was desperate to identify the new owner and devise a way to maintain control of the lake. She even contacted Mayor Wilson, urging him to explore zoning restrictions or even an eminent domain claim, none of which held legal ground, as Merrick assured me. Over the next week, Karen's desperation became more obvious. She convened another emergency legal committee, declaring the HOA would fight for their lake rights. The mayor began publicly questioning zoning and public access rules, though our lawyer confirmed none of those efforts had any foundation. The property was, without question, privately owned. Meanwhile, I met with a local conservation group and a water quality specialist to evaluate the lake's ecological state. What they found was alarming. Years of unchecked landscaping practices had tainted the water. Chemical runoff had led to aggressive algae growth, and the fish population showed clear signs of stress. The HOA, in all its grand plans and talk of prestige, had failed to protect the lake's most basic health. The HOA had long ignored the actual environmental health of the lake, using supposed ecological concerns as a justification to ban activities like fishing. I also consulted a security expert to discuss installing surveillance cameras and creating a sound management plan for the property. Everything was being prepared for the moment when I would reveal my ownership. That moment came when Karen made a bold, symbolic move. She organized an elaborate lakeside party, inviting only original homeowners and deliberately excluding newer residents. Her aim was to reinforce their so-called community rights over the lake. The party was set for Saturday afternoon and featured catered food, music, and wine bars stationed at both ends of the lake. What Karen didn't realize was that I had already filed the legal paperwork to terminate the recreational use agreement early, citing multiple breaches of the maintenance terms. My attorney confirmed that the HOA's neglect of water quality standards provided more than enough justification. Though the agreement was set to expire in under a month, I decided this public event was the ideal time for the reveal. As the party reached full momentum with about 60 guests mingling, drinking, and enjoying themselves, I arrived with Merrick, Samuel, my real estate attorney, and a local police officer I had briefed in advance. Calmly walking to the center of the gathering, I picked up the microphone Karen had been using. "Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're enjoying this beautiful day at the lake." Karen stormed toward me. "This is a private event. You weren't invited," she snapped, trying to seize the microphone. I held it tightly. "Actually, Karen, I believe there's been some confusion about who's entitled to do the inviting." I nodded to my attorney, who handed me an official document. "As the legal owner of this lake and the surrounding 10 feet of shoreline, I'm informing you all that you are currently trespassing on private property." The crowd went silent. Karen's face turned crimson. "What are you talking about? This is HOA property." "No, Karen, it never was. The lake belonged to Meridian Development until 3 days ago, when I purchased it outright." I held up the deed for all to see. "Effective immediately, I'm terminating the recreational use agreement, which was set to expire in 28 days regardless." I gestured to the officer. "I've asked Officer Reynolds to ensure everyone departs in an orderly manner. You have 15 minutes to gather your things and leave." Karen looked stunned, like she'd been doused in ice water. "You can't do this. The community has rights." "Actually, I can, and I have," I said evenly. "Officer Reynolds has a trespassing complaint ready if needed, but I trust it won't come to that. After all, Karen, you've always been such a stickler for the rules." As the crowd murmured in shock, I continued. "For those wondering, this is what happens when power is abused unchecked. Consider this a lesson in consequences." The gathering dissolved quickly. Many guests left with sideways glances at Karen. Several approached me afterward, expressing surprise and even admiration. "About time someone stood up to her," one longtime resident whispered. This was long overdue. Within the week, I installed no trespassing signs around the lake and hired 24/7 security. I also held a press conference with the local paper, announcing my plans to convert the lake into a fish conservation and education center for children. "This lake has been environmentally neglected for years," I told the reporters. "Our tests show elevated levels of phosphates and nitrates from surrounding lawn chemicals. Our team will now work on restoring the lake's health." At first, community reactions were mixed. But as word of Karen's intended private development leaked, opinions shifted. Many residents who had opposed losing access became supportive after learning she'd planned to build private homes on the shoreline for profit. Karen was furious. She tried to sue me for destroying community value, but the court dismissed her case immediately. My attorney presented the clear title and expired agreement. She then tried to weaponize the HOA, pushing for fines, restrictions, even attempting to place a lien on my property. But now residents were beginning to question her motives. The turning point came at the next HOA meeting. Safira Duskund stood up. "I've been on this board for 3 years," she said, her voice trembling at first but growing firmer. "And I've watched Karen bend the rules, target certain homeowners, and steer HOA funds into projects that benefit her friends. Last year, we spent $80,000 renovating a small park used by only 10 homes, all owned by Karen's Circle, while rejecting requests for basic playground equipment in the main park, used by dozens of families." Safira's courage opened the floodgates. Long silent residents began to speak out. A motion was made to audit all HOA finances from the past 5 years. As financial records came under scrutiny, irregularities surfaced and trust in Karen eroded. Sensing the shift, I announced a special initiative: free fishing passes for all children in the neighborhood, except those with parents on the HOA board, unless they resigned. It was a petty move, perhaps, but effective. Soon, even residents who had mocked me began knocking on my door. "My son really wants to learn to fish," said Veronica Palmer, one of Karen's staunch supporters. "Your daughter told him about a junior conservation program." The discomfort on her face was unmistakable. Just weeks ago, she wouldn't return my greeting at the community pool. "Yes," I said. "We're launching a program that teaches children about ecology, conservation, and sustainable fishing. Len is helping organize it, but it's only open to families not currently represented on the HOA board." Veronica's face twisted with frustration and calculation. "I've been reconsidering my position on the board," she said. "Some recent decisions have been troubling." "Interesting," I replied. "Let me know if your situation changes. The program starts next Saturday." Within 3 days, Veronica resigned, citing personal reasons. 2 more board members followed within the week. Karen's desperation intensified. She spread rumors that the lake was now polluted and unsafe. I quickly responded by publishing certified water quality reports showing it was cleaner than ever. Then she made her boldest and most desperate move yet, trying to bribe Merrick Henderson. She offered to erase his past HOA violations and promised him a seat on a new board if he helped her regain control. What Karen didn't know was that Merrick had recorded the entire conversation. Karen's voice was unmistakable. "I can make all those violation notices disappear, Merrick," she said clearly on the recording. "And there would be a place for you on the restructured board, with a stipend, of course. All you need to do is help convince Thorncroft to sell the lake to the HOA. Tell him about the environmental liabilities, the insurance cost. Scare him a little." Merrick played the recording for me with a satisfied grin. "I think our friend Karen forgot the first rule of being a villain," he said. "Never try to bribe a retired ethics attorney." Karen's final act came late one night. Security cameras captured her and 2 other HOA board members trespassing on my property. They appeared to be collecting water samples, or, more likely, trying to contaminate the lake to support her pollution claims. The footage clearly showed Karen pouring something from a small bottle into the lake, right near the children's fishing area. I sent the video to the police immediately. Karen was charged with criminal trespassing and attempted environmental contamination. As she was being processed at the police station, investigators began examining the HOA's finances during her tenure. What they discovered led to further investigations into fund misappropriation, favoritism in enforcement, and efforts to lower property values before her real estate contacts purchased them. 2 weeks later, I invited all residents, except the current HOA leadership, to a meeting at my home to discuss the lake's future. The turnout was overwhelming, with nearly every household represented. I laid out my plan. I would transfer ownership of the lake to a newly created community trust, but under 3 conditions. The HOA leadership must be completely restructured, with term limits and transparent voting processes. All HOA regulations must be reviewed and revised to ensure fairness. An independent ethics committee with rotating community members must be created to oversee HOA decisions. Then I unveiled one final move. Even Merrick and Samuel hadn't known. "Many of you may not realize," I said to the stunned audience, "but over the past month, I've quietly purchased mortgage notes from Lakeside National Bank." I paused. Karen Wellington's home is among them. Gasps filled the room. Using my financial network and Samuel's banking connections, I had legally acquired mortgage debts on nearly 20% of the neighborhood, targeting Karen and her allies in particular. It was unorthodox, but entirely legal. I don't plan to foreclose or call in these debts, I reassured the anxious faces. In fact, I'm offering refinancing below market rates to all homeowners. But first, we must fix the system that's divided this community for years. The vote to replace the HOA leadership was nearly unanimous. Karen Wellington was forced to resign in disgrace, now facing criminal charges, civil lawsuits from mistreated homeowners, and an investigation into her real estate practices. With her reputation ruined, she put her home on the market, but found no buyers. Safira Duskin was elected the new HOA president, pledging transparency and real reform. The lake was officially renamed Rachel's Lake, in honor of my late wife, and I transferred ownership to the new community trust, with legally binding conditions to guarantee permanent public access. 3 months later, Selene and I hosted a community fishing day at Rachel's Lake. Nearly every family attended. Children laughed and learned to fish together. Parents mingled across former social lines that Karen had once manipulated. That evening, Selene and I sat on the dock, watching the sunset on the water. She leaned against my shoulder and smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. "Mom would be really proud of you, Dad," she said softly. Looking out over the peaceful lake where the community had finally come together, I replied, "I think she'd be proud of both of us, kiddo." A year later, our neighborhood had become a model for HOA reform. Neighboring communities adopted our ethics code and governance structure. Karen, having lost most of her assets in court, had moved away. I was even asked to run for mayor after James Wilson chose not to seek re-election following revelations of his connection to Karen. But I declined. Instead, I established a scholarship in Rachel's name for children who had lost a parent to cancer. Sometimes, defeating a bully isn't about being the bigger bully. It's about changing the rules of the game entirely. And if you're watching this while trapped in your own HOA nightmare, remember, never underestimate the power of someone who knows the rules and waits for the perfect moment to use them.